It's a road edition of The Panel presented by Sport Chek here in beautiful Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Also here with a couple of beauties myself, Bob Stauffer and Jack Michaels from 630 Ched. Guys, the Edmonton Oilers kicked off this road trip with a win in Detroit. However, they lost back-to-back matchups against Washington and Tampa Bay. Jack, was it just the starts that they couldn't get over?
Well, first of all, if this is the best you've found after looking around, you haven't looked very hard. Secondly,
it's hot. Secondly, it's hot.
You make a good point with the start respect to Washington in particular. I mean, fourth line versus fourth line twice in the first 6 minutes, and you're chasing the game. And Todd McLellan talked about having the opportunities to get back in the game, but when you spot the defending Stanley Cup champions too early, you're going to be in tough. The Tampa Bay game was a little bit different in the sense that this is a tough back-to-back situation because it's not only the 2-hour and 10-minute flight down to Tampa, Florida for the second of the back-to-back, but it's also the hour-long process it takes from getting from the Capitals arena and then off the ground. So it really becomes a 3.5 hour travail. Having said that, I think the Oilers would tell you no excuses. And there were, again, opportunities to bury in that game. And really what we've seen the last two games is Edmonton not being as sharp as their opponent around the net, getting the same opportunities, but also falling victim to some otherworldly saves, particularly with Andrei Vasilevsky headbutting an attempted shot by Toby Reeder out of the net. Just that kind of situation. But what's ahead is most important because a win over Florida, which would be Edmonton's 10th straight down here, that would salvage a 2-2 trip and send the Oilers home 9-6-1 through a pretty difficult portion of their schedule.
Yeah, you know, Tony, I mean, I looked at this, and the Oilers playing 9-15, 7-11 before the game against Tampa Bay, and Edmonton playing Washington and Tampa Bay back-to-back. I mean, those two teams are playing pretty deep into the playoffs last year, and one of those teams won the Cup. So I actually thought that might be the most difficult stretch for Edmonton in the first half of the season. Jacoby talked about this in July. And you know what? I think when you're not quite as finite with your skill set around the net, that sometimes Vince Lombardi had a saying, fatigue makes cowards of us all, and that's sometimes an illustration that's the mind's the first thing to go in that scenario when they're tired. So they played really good teams. They won or they lost each game differently. Jack mentioned the fourth line scenario against Washington, and then against Tampa Bay, their stars came out to play and they delivered. So that said, the one thing I'll say about the game against Tampa Bay, the Oilers had the opportunity to go away, and they didn't really go away. They sort of hung around and they battled in that game. They just weren't as good in terms of finishing off plays. And as Jack mentioned, for whatever reason, they say in Florida, it's not the heat that kills you, it's the humidity. And I'm living testament to that right now. But this team the Oilers have found ways to win here for a long time. And if they can do that, then, I looked at the first 16 games of the schedule. If they could at least be 500 through the first 16 games, they'd be in pretty good shape. Well, they're going to be at least 500, and they got a chance to make some hay against Florida coming up.
One thing you guys mentioned was the goaltending that they've placed, but let's talk about the goaltending for the Edmonton Oilers. Now, saying goaltender controversy might be a little bit too much because we know Cam Talbot is still the #1 guy, but has Mikko Koskinen earned himself a few extra starts here? Bob, we'll start with you.
I don't think there's a goaltending controversy. Cam Talbot's the #1 goaltender. Cam Talbot will start against Florida, but I think Mikko Koskinen, because of his work ethic in practice, the extra time that he's spent out on the ice with Dustin Schwartz, has really endeared himself to his teammates, and they have some confidence that when he's in there, there's not a substantive dropout. So they have confidence in him, but it's still Talbot's job.
Well, I'd agree with that. And what Mikko Koskinen has done, to your point, though, is given the coach some confidence early in this season to spot him for perhaps a few more starts than if he hadn't played so well in Nashville and shut out Chicago at home. I think those buy you some currency with the coaches. And just like players, goaltenders are looking for those kind of opportunities, just like guys like Drake Caggiula and Alex Chiasson, who've earned their way into the top 6 with some good performances and allowed themselves, I don't want to say the luxury, but the comfort level of knowing one bad shift isn't going to get them bumped off that situation. Same with Mikko Koskinen. And I'm not saying he played a poor game the other night in Tampa. Again, I think the grade A chances in both games were about roughly the same. Edmonton didn't hit the net on a lot of its chances, too. You can't just look at the shots on goal, which were even, by the way, in Tampa. So, you know, it's a matter of when you've got guys like Steven Stamkos and Alex Ovechkin and, oh, by the way, Nikita Kucherov finishing chances, you know you're dealing with some grade A opposition. And you can't give grade A chances to those guys. So what Koskinen's done here through 4 performances, I think, has earned himself some spot duty. And I will concur with Bob, though. It'll be Cam Talbot in the pipes. And speaking of Alex Chason, he did not play the second of the back-to-back. Yeah. I look for him to try to muscle his way into the lineup against Florida.
And very quickly here, because I know we got to wrap up, guys. Bob, we'll start with you. What did you make of the Milan Lucic incident that occurred last night?
Well, you know what? If the stuff gets called during the game, maybe that doesn't happen. I mean, Matthew Joseph got inside the equipment of Ryan Nugent-Hopkins and Connor McDavid in the first 2 shifts of the game. He and Cedric Paquette were running around most of the game. He hits Chris Russell from behind. Jujhar Khaira and Zach Kassian, you know, offer him the opportunity to dance, and he didn't oblige them. Stuff happens.
Jack, anything to add?
Well, again, I mean, part of the reason Milan Lucic is with the Edmonton Oilers, and I understand he is a top 9 contributor as well offensively, but he's also there to settle games down. And, you know, Chris Russell was absolutely belted by the guy in question. And when you're in a 5-2 game midway through the 3rd period against a returning Eastern Conference finalist, chances are the outcome of the game has already been settled. Now it's time to maybe send a message for when the clubs meet again in mid-December. And I think that's part of Milan Lucic's responsibility to his teammates, but also to the game in an era where, you know, a lot of those hits are not necessarily being called for penalties, nor should they be, but there's a way to mitigate things and a way to create space for your teammates the next time around. And I think that's what was on Milan Lucic's mind.
Lucic trying to send a message last night in Tampa, and the Oilers trying to send a message to the Florida Panthers when they take him on at the BB&T Center. Jack and Bob will have your call on 6:30 Ched. As always, I'll keep you covered on Oilers TV. This has been The Panel presented by Sport Chek in beautiful Fort Lauderdale.